Hello everyone, and welcome to the fourth and final part in this series in creating realistic materials in Blender's Viewport. And in this one we're going to be talking about the emission shader, and also how to use masks when working with GLSL material nodes. And like always, the first thing we want to do is switch our shading from multi-texture to GLSL. Then I will select my lamp and type Shift S and use selection to cursor. And this will move the lamp right where Suzanne is. And Suzanne's going to be my emission object, so I want to move the lamp up so that it's roughly in the center. And it doesn't have to be perfect, just as close to the center as possible. And so now we can switch to textured view. The lamp is going to be hard to select now, so we can always select it up here in our outliner, since it's hiding in the middle of our mesh. But we want to select Suzanne and then add a new material, and I'll just call this emission. And now we need to open up a window so that we can use our node editor. So we'll switch there to node editor and click use nodes. And then I can just open up that emission material. But this really isn't the type of node material that we want. So with this node selected, let's type Shift S, which is switch type 2. And then we'll go to input and extended material. So now our material node has all of these other options, most of which we can't use. But this emission value we can use. And we're going to use that to control the strength and value of the emission. So we'll type Shift A and go to Input and then Lamp Data. And we have a few options here. But what we need to change first is make sure that we select the correct lamp. Our scene only has one lamp, but if you had more than one, you would need to indicate which one to use here. And then we just need to use the color. So we'll plug the color into the color of the material, which has to be set that to the emission material. And we're also going to plug the color into the emission value. Okay, so now I'll come up to the outliner and I'll select the lamp. And now if I change the color of that lamp, it changes the color of the object itself and the color of the light that it's emitting. So one thing that we can do to make this look a little better is invert the normal on the material node. That way all of that light isn't contained on the inside, it's showing on the outside. And aside from being able to affect the color of that emission, also, if you just increase or decrease the strength of that lamp, it will also have an impact on the material for Suzanne as well. So we can really make this look like that this object is emitting the light in the scene. And this is really fast and quick to set up if your whole object is emitting light. But now let's talk about how to use masks for the instance that maybe only part of your mesh is going to emit light, or you want to separate any two materials. Usually masks are the best way to do it. So in this scene I've used cycles to texture this object. So these are using all of cycles materials. And so what I need to do is I need to bake some of these textures out. So the first one will be just the diffuse texture, which is just the color. The next texture that I'd need to bake out is the normal map. Then I'd need the specularity map to control the strength of the specularity. And now I'd need to get a light map. And the way that I do that is I just select the diffuse material and I just disconnect the color or the texture from it. And so now all I have is the white color of the diffuse material and all of that normal map information that's sort of interacting with the emission shader. So you get all of those light and shadows from the light. So this is our light map. And it's this texture that I'm going to use to create the emission mask. So if we switch over to GIMP, so all we need to do is go to Colors, and then Brightness Contrast. And in my case, I'll move the contrast all the way up, and then slide the brightness down until all that's left is the color from where that light is emitting from. And next, it's important to desaturate the texture, because typically masks are just black and white since they're only using values. And so in GLSL, I have this object which only has a reflection material applied to it now. But we need to create some more materials, and then we'll add that reflection later. So the next material will be called Textures, and then we'll create a third one that will just be called Nodes. Okay, and I'll tab into edit mode, and I'll just assign that node's material to the whole object. And then click the little Use Nodes tab. And so now I'll open up the node editor and select that material called Textures. And so now I can type Shift A and go to Input Geometry. And just like the last time, we actually need to select this material and type Shift S, switch to Extended Material, because we need that emission value. So now we'll select the Textures material there. And so now let's add our textures. And again, I've already imported all of those in. So we'll type Shift A and go to Input Texture. And so then I'll open up the first texture I'll need is just the diffuse texture with no lighting or shadow. It's just the color. And I'll use the UV coordinates and plug the color directly into the color on the material node. And then I'll use Shift D to duplicate that texture. And this time I'm going to open up the light map, which is this texture. And you could bake all of this together, but I like to keep it separate just for a little more added control. So now I can type Shift A and go to Color Mix RGB, and I'll connect these both together, and then switch this type to Overlay, and take the factor all the way up. And since we'll be using a lot of textures, if you want, we can collapse some of these nodes to create a little more room. But I'll select this texture and use Shift D again to duplicate it, and then maybe collapse these since I won't be using them anymore. Trying to get into the habit of just keeping nodes a little more organized as I work, because I have a habit of sort of making a mess of them. But in this texture, I'm going to select the normal map texture. And again, we'll just keep using the UV coordinates. And so now I can type Shift A and add a vector normal map node. And connect this texture to it. And then plug the normal output into the normal input on the material node. And so now we have our normal information on the model. Decrease the strength a little. And it looks way too specular, so we need to add our specularity map now. So we'll duplicate the normal map texture. And switch the texture to the specularity map. And this will be really easy. We'll just plug the color of that texture directly into the specularity input on the material node. And that looks way better. So now all of those cracks and dark areas don't have any specularity. Alright, so it's looking good. The next thing we need to do is we need to add our emission mask to control that emission. So we'll duplicate this texture node. And open up that mask that we created in GIMP. And then we can just plug this directly into the emission input on the material node. And so now the mask is working, but to have a little more control, let's type Shift A and go to Converter Math. And now this math node can control the strength of that emission. So if I take it down, the scene becomes really dark, and if I take it up, it becomes really bright. So it's working just as emission would work in cycles. And actually, maybe just to demonstrate that a little further, if I select the lamp that I have in the background, if I take the energy all the way down, you can see that this will affect the entire scene except for the area that's emitting light. And then the last thing that I'll do is I'll just add that reflection material to the object. And we've done this, so many times before in previous parts in the series. But just to sort of complete this material, we'll add the reflection in. So I'll type Shift A and go to Input and Material. And then I will select the reflection material and then connect these with a Mix RGB node. And so I'll type Shift A and go to Vector Normal node. And then Shift A again, Converter Color Ramp. And I will connect the dot value into the color ramp. And the color ramp into the mix factor. And then I'll take that normal node and I will plug the normal output from the geometry node into the normal input. And again, I'm sure that you're very sick of doing this process. We did it so many times in this series, but just to sort of complete this material. And then of course the normal map needs to be plugged into that reflection material as well. And then the steps. You just adjust the color ramp until you get the Fresnel effect that you like, and so forth. And I think in the final, or the original material that I did, I used separate masks to separate, that so that there was no reflection on the area that was emitting light. And I don't think that there was any reflection on the ground either. But it just shows you how masks are so important in creating these types of materials, because you can really separate those different materials apart from each other. But that's it for this series, so I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.